Wonderful. Well, our next speaker is a quantum physicist, a multifaceted researcher who loves to explain the theories and concepts of metaphysics and spirituality through scientific lens. Dan believes that no stone should be unturned when searching for the truth about the deep connectedness of all things. So he draws on sources like science, mythology, popular culture, and channeled information to reach conclusions about our existence. Today, he'll be helping us understand the coherence longitudinal EMF projective plasma body proof of the higher self. And even if you don't understand a word he says, I am certain you'll enjoy it. I want to introduce with a very, very warm welcome. I am a tremendous fan of Mr. Dan Winter. Let me bring you in here. Hi, Dan. How are you?
Oh, great to be here. Happy to be here. You're smiling. Me too.
Oh, it's such a gift to have you here. You are incredible, and I will go ahead and let you take it away. I can't wait to see your presentation. Go ahead.
Thank you, Geraldine. I'm happy to be here, happy to share. And actually, I think our conference asks the right question. We talk in spiritual language about what is the higher self, and yet, my background is electrical engineering, University of Detroit, and systems analysis. And I've been doing psychophysiology and biofeedback for 30 years and teaching physics of consciousness. So, of course, for me, when people use the words like what is the higher self, for example, I like to have not just a scientific language for that. It's not just about science. It's simply about a language which is precise and meaningful and measurable enough to be shareable. And obviously, if we understood these things in a more precise and scientific and rigorous language, we could do them better. And that's like access the higher self, as it were. And what does that have to do with the 0 point? So that's our task here. It doesn't mean that I'm speaking to electrical engineers, which I often do, or physicists, but it does mean we try to use some language that enables us to understand in a new way that spiritual concepts actually now fit science so beautifully that we can unify our religions and perhaps eliminate religion wars in the process. So what is the higher self if you're a scientist? I'd like to revert to, one of my turning point experiences in my life. I was going to the Gurdjieff School in West Virginia, Claymont.org, and I was studying sacred gymnastic. We were doing the Gurdjieff gymnastic. Actually, I played the piano for some of that. And quite a few times, we would do this, a form of sacred dance related to Sufi dance. And we do it with a lot of rigor. And you could feel clearly there was a bubble of energy growing in the room. You remember those scenes in the end of that famous film, Meetings with Remarkable Men, when they did the Gurdjieff sacred gymnastic, and you could feel just the electricity of that disciplined, synchronous, spiritual movement, creating a bubble of energy. And then I distinctly recall we would leave it was George Washington's nephew's pig farm mansion in Charlestown, West Virginia, and we'd go out and work in the garden, and we were told, well, you're carrying a bubble of energy with you. And I remember actually feeling something. I would feel like there was a presence around your head, around your body, as I do now and often. And you would begin to almost intuitively, almost unconsciously avoid jerky movements because you'd have this feeling that, gee, I'm carrying something with me. My aura is now walking with me with so much inertia. And now we're going to learn that that's an electrical term, that my inertia of my aura was such that it was something worth carrying, something worth maintaining. So I did not want to be a jerk. I didn't want to be jerky. I wanted to move with the quality of grace so that I could continue to grow that aura. Sorry, just 1 second here. So The ability of the aura to grow turns out to be related to the generation of a centripetal implosion force, something that holds a body of charge like a cold plasma, a ball of charge, which is your aura. And in this talk, we would like to make the case that that is the beginning of what is in fact the higher self. Because later we want to talk about the way in which you actually come to see through that bubble of charge. I mean, to the point that you can use it as an eyeball, and that you can take that ball of charge somewhere even outside your body and it will work in the same way, but it depends on building that ball of charge very coherently first. And it relates to how you take memory through death, for example. Sorry about that. Too many phones ringing here. So the second example I wanted to suggest, you know those famous stories of the San Bushman in Africa? I want to see now if I can actually share my screen here for a moment. I'm going to click share screen. And now I'm going to click on here, your entire screen. Let's see if this works. Share. Okay. Now, hopefully, you're seeing my screen. Maybe? No? Nope.
We can still see you, just so you know.
Yeah. Well, let me try that one more time. Okay, so I click stop sharing. Oh, here it comes. It took it a minute. Okay. Now you got this beautiful little echo on the screen. Let's see if I can. A moment. I'm doing better here. Now, are you seeing pictures of San Bushman, I hope? So the next example, remember those famous stories when a shaman, they go into this dance, and we're using the example of the San Bushman in Africa. And when they do this dance, they do a powerful ritual dance, and they're singing and chanting, and they're in this circle. Now, the physics of the ritual of this rite of vision for the shaman includes a very accurate rhythm drumming section, a very accurate rhythmed circle dance, and hopefully they may do it on a magnetic line cross. They do many activities which have to do with the physics of imploding a ball of charge. And then it is quite well known that this San Bushman, once he enters this trance, which we're later going to learn the brainwave signature of that trance, when he enters this trance, it's well known that he uses it to see through the bodies of his sick tribesmen to actually help heal them. So he's actually using the ball of charge, that he's using the projective geometry of the implosive charge of this trance dance to create a bubble through which he's actually able to look and see through these things. Now I'm going to click stop the sharing again here. 1 second. Okay. Now, I would like to suggest that that bubble of charge that the San Bushman uses to see through the bodies of sick people and to project his aura, and there's a parallel to remote viewing and astral travel, is actually something that we electrical engineers can know about now. We're going to talk about what that is. But for now, we're going to call it a ball of cold plasma, and we're going to use the vision, and we have pictures of this, but I don't need those right now, of a picture of a ball lightning. Now, a ball of lightning famously is a toroidal, donut-shaped ball of plasma or charge, and ball lightning is famous for responding to telepathy and people, and you can talk to it. And the reason you can talk to it is because that the more centripetal and implosive that torus vortex is, the more it is self-aware. Now, if you begin to think about that for a little while, you can begin to get some clue of what we might mean by a higher self. Now, let's see, the next things in the notes was telepathy by Gurdjieff. Now, you know that, telepathy by Kozyrev. You know that when the Kozyrev mirrors enabled telepathy, they put these big metal cylinders at Earth grid magnetic lines, sacred sites, which are then compressional, you see. And then inside this metal cylinder, we now know there's a microwave tuning related to the body's microwave ADP. And they achieved incredible military quality telepathy every time, as proven by Karakov and others. Now, was that radio of that telepathy related to what we mean by a higher self? I'm suggesting that we meditate on that question. The higher self, we're saying, is a ball of charge which eventually becomes coherent enough that you can use it as a remote eyeball. And we want to give some examples of that. The next thing I want to talk about is this program we're doing for teaching children to see without their eyes. You know that the World Without Blindness project in Russia became quite famous. I'm going to click my share screen one more time. Let's see if I can do a better job this time. I know that it took it a minute last time, so we'll just give it a second. But we're now using our biofeedback app. I see a fractal. We're using our biofeedback app to teach children to see without their eyes. Let's see if I can move this. And then I want to use these pictures of the kids seeing without their eyes. Let's see if we can get there. Yes, here we go. So what we're doing is we're taking this, the brainwave signature. This is flameinmind.com, and we're measuring these harmonics in the brainwave. And we're doing it with these kids. Let's see if we have a picture. Yes, you can see. This is one of the kids here. And these kids are blindfolded. Now here, you can see. The kids are blindfolded, yet they're actively seeing without their eyes. And as they see without their eyes, we're measuring their brain waves, and we're observing this cascade of harmonics. Now, I'll turn off the screen sharing again. So all of that, the work we're doing to teach kids to see without their eyes, is at flameinmind.com/outer vision. The reason I bring it up here is there's a very specific part of what might be a clue to, quote, the higher self here, which is that, you know, you've got these films, there's hundreds of films like this. Our group is only one of many. We're doing the brainwave work, but it's a very well-known phenomenon of kids who can see without their eyes. And it is a trance state they go into, and we know how to measure that now. It's a coherent cascade of harmonics, generally either octave or golden ratio cascade of harmonics in the brainwave from alpha to gamma, from about 8 hertz up to about 40 hertz. That there's a cascade like a caduceus, implosive, in fact, in the EEG, in the brain waves, ranging from alpha to gamma. Remember, alpha around 8 hertz is the Schumann, so you're starting to hear the earth and reach into the higher frequencies. And when you get into that kind of trance with your eyes closed, and that cascade of implosive, coherent brainwave caduceus starts happening, the resultant compression means that when we ask these kids, well, what's it like to see without your eyes? And there they are blindfolded, and they're doing Rubik's Cubes and playing games and doing coloring books and just all kinds of stuff. And it's obvious that they're seeing perfectly, and yet they're completely blindfolded. And you ask them, well, what's it like to see without their eyes? And every single one of those kids actually answers the question in a similar way. They say, well, it's like I'm seeing a little tube, a little vortex inside my head, and I line it up and I look down through that vortex and I see through that tube. I'm seeing through a vortex, a tube. Every single one of the kids answers the question the same way. Now, I ask you, is that a clue to what is the higher self? Remember, they're going into a trance to do this. They're alpha, their brain waves entrain the Schumann, and they're getting this. They need extreme relaxation. And there's quite a discipline to it. In fact, originally, they told the kids the best way to get into that trance was to imagine yourself in beautiful nature. And then your body kind of flips an electrical switch and you get fractal. I mean, you start imploding charge. Because intuitively, your body will get centripetal if your body believes it's in beautiful nature, because it will want to implode the living charge there, which is the definition of life force, is to get centripetal. We say get centripetal or get dead, get fractal. And so that vortex tube, I want to explain something about in terms of the 0 point. Why is accessing that vortex tube the physics of the 0 point? And what does that have to do with the higher self? And this is where we get at this idea of longitudinal waves. And I have some pictures for that. Let's try one more time on this little screen share. We're going to get better at this. Click on share. Okay, wait a minute. Now we're going to grab our little PowerPoint here. This is my keynote. Here goes the keynote. And we need slide number, wait a minute, the physics here is, the 0 point slide is number 16. Okay, 1 second here. Okay, here it is, slide number 16. Okay, now let's see if we can move this over so you can see it better. There you go. Okay, so the question is, as you get very still in that field, your aura achieves a kind of compression. The vortexes get centripetal. We talked about this in terms of the famous film we made on the physics of ascension, that your DNA braids implosively and it starts to assemble these vortex worms toward the still point. And the physics of this and why this could explain the 0 point concept, if you will listen for just a moment. On the left, you have this image of what's called a transverse wave electromagnetics, which is all of our radio signals. The electromagnetic signal is going up and down. However, when the transverse wave, normal electromagnetic fields, encounter a perfect vortex, we say pine cones kissing noses, and you see this picture, it's literally like going down a caduceus, down a pine cone. And the inertia of that wave going down that caduceus on that pine cone, perfect golden spiral on the perfect 60-degree implosion cone, what happens is there's what's called perfected translation of vorticity, and the inertia is squeezed out the toothpaste tube at the tip of the vertex, which is called the Planck dimension, Planck length and time, which is the universal key signature of all of physics, Planck length. And when it's squeezed out perfectly through that toothpaste tube, the inertia that was going up and down is now on the right going what's called a compressional or a longitudinal wave, longitudinal electromagnetic, sometimes incorrectly called scalar or torsional. Now, the cool thing is that longitudinal waves, when they propagate, they can go faster than light. They can create action at a distance, and they carry the inertia of focus. They can become centripetal when they cross again at a distance. So this is the idea of plasma containment. We're trying to get the idea of what actually contains the plasma, for example, when you see these beautiful pictures of ghosts leaving the body, what's holding that plasma together? And the physics of this, we believe, we call it two pine cones kissing noses. In physics, this is called phase conjugate optics. Lasers have to meet in a picture just like this, literally in a square, to phase conjugate, which is to implode light. And this is the first time physics measured negentropy, self-organization, and time reversal, which is again related to negentropy. So this geometry is perfectly related to something called the golden mean ratio, which many of you know about. It's a perfect pine cone, perfect implosion, perfect geometry of compression. And this we now know is in recent work that I did in physics, wrote equations to prove that this is the physics of how hydrogen is built. And you see what's happening if you build this golden ratio cascade to Planck, you're making the perfect spin path to a 0 point. In fact, you're defining 0 point energy. So if you take the Planck length or time and multiply by simple powers of golden mean ratio, you get hydrogen radii, ADP, Schumann harmonics, brainwave harmonics, Earth year, Venus year, solar year, galactic year, precessional year. You get all of the frequencies physics uses to create negentropy, self-organization, the path out of chaos. So this is important to understand the 0 point energy, and what does this have to do with accessing the higher self? Now I'm going to turn off these pictures. Now you can see more of this physics conversation at fractalfield.com/vacuum energy. But you didn't really come here to talk physics, did you? You came here to spiritually understand what is the higher self. Well, there's some other examples we want to use to talk about this story. Let's talk about Kundalini. Now, We just did a new series of films on the biophysics of Kundalini. They're professionally done. If I may say, they're quite useful. The Physics of Kundalini and Bliss. You can see the 6 films at goldenmean.info/Kundalini. Point being that in that series of films, we identified the harmonics of the spine liquid pump, called the sacrocranial tidal frequencies, which also fit my new equation, origin of negentropy, which are Planck times golden ratio. So the low frequencies of the spine liquid pump, the low frequencies of the breath, and the low frequencies of the brain waves, and the low frequencies of the Schumann, these all fit this same caduceus cascade, life-building implosion that makes you centripetal, implosive, and that implosive charge then goes down through that 0 point called Planck threshold and starts to build a coherent body of longitudinal waves which are projectable, literally the raising of the Jed. And that's alchemizing your aura. Alchem in the sense of access to the right angle or phase shift, to the chem, C-H-E-M means access to the black hole or access to implosion. So the alchemizing of your aura is the imploding of your charge through this coherent threshold so that then it can propagate coherently as a longitudinal wave. Now, longitudinal waves are interesting because when they cross each other at a distance in a fractal array, and your awareness begins to inhabit that fractal array, where the nodes cross at a distance, why the Earth grid is dodecaecosa, and why the sacred sites are dodecaecosa around the Earth, because that's the place where these longitudinal waves cross coherently at a distance. And there, the compression can bounce again to center and resynthesize a transverse heat-containing component, which is the physics of how Ingo Swann famously lit a flame with his mind at a distance through a Faraday cage, measured many times in a lab. We know the brainwave signature, which allowed him to light that flame with his mind. It's called flameinmind.com. That is our brainwave app, and it's about building a flame in your mind. And that flame, we're saying, is the physics, when it grows coherently, of what you call your higher self, because you can literally see through it. Now, an example of proof of that physics, which if I may say, I'm a bit proud of, our Therify.net. Now, I dig up the pictures here, but you just go look when you have time, Therify.net. It's a plasma technology inspired by Prairie, which is now commercially successful, creating rejuvenation, reducing pain, all kinds of things are the anecdotal reports. We don't make medical claims, but cold atmospheric plasma is famous in medicine, and we claim to be the most efficient way to make cold plasma, because obviously, if you're getting centripetal implosively, the indicator that is negentropic or self-organizing is that it spontaneously gets colder. It means you have reduced disorder. That's called negentropy. Like how Schauberger knew his water vortex, rock powder doped piezoelectric water vortex, was about to spontaneously start making voltage power from gravity at the moment the water vortex spontaneously began getting colder. And that's a beginning of an intro that if you understood why how a vortex can get centripetal implosive, you would know how and why vortex made gravity. And if you did that, you might learn why objects fall to the ground, unlike NASA, Stephen Hawking, and Einstein. And if you knew why objects fall to the ground, then you'd know how that Mercury vortex made gravity in the Vimana Hanabu Nazi Bell, and you'd learn then why we lost the war to the Nazis, who took over the South Pole and many planetoids, actually, and they're enslaving people. And it all began because we did not know why or how a vortex makes gravity, because we did not know why objects fall to the ground. Now, again, all of that is at fractalfield.com/vacuum energy. Now, what does that have to do with your higher self? I want to conclude this series. I see we only have a few minutes left. I want to conclude this series with a little bit about death. Isn't that a beautiful romantic way to end this story? But So, but here, if I do this, let's just try it. So I want to talk about the physics of death here for a very particular reason, which is that we now have learned something about how death is simply an electrical black hole. And that's what I want to discuss. So this is this famous picture. You've seen it. This is the scene at an auto accident here. And you see how this person who just died in the car accident. Now, you would not see this if this was in a metal city with lots of electric spark. But look in this camera. This is the ghost of that person leaving their body after death. This is real. This is not there's nothing doctored about this. This has happened too many times. My question to you is that your higher self? And what is holding that plasma body together? And the evidence is from thousands of reports that you can see through that body. Now, what I started to say about Therify.net, our plasma tech, is that we have multiple reports that implosive plasma, we have 2 plasma cocoons, and let's see, maybe I should show them to you actually. The Therify slide is at 140. Let me see if I just go back up there for a second. So we're making this plasma and we're delivering implosive charge, broad spectral phase conjugation. We're making 2 big pine cones. Yeah, here's the picture. So we take these 2 plasma cones, and when you sit between them, you feel this rush. It accelerates metabolism and circulation. So we're imploding charge. The point I want to make, and you can read hundreds of reports of results there at Therify.net, and it's actually getting to be a bit famous, which is wonderful. It was inspired by Prior, and you can read about the science there. But the point for this conversation is the detailed reports, for example, Maya, who's so wonderful from Paris and Athens, who clearly reported that the Therify experience triggered dramatically her ability to lucid dream. Now, I would like to suggest you kind of consider that for a moment, because we strongly believe that the ability to lucid dream predicts ability to take memory through death. And that's what we want to talk about. Like how mummification works after death is actually the natron salt implodes the charge of the aura. It alchemically turns the flesh to a gold powder amulet, which is why mummy powder was served in every pharmacy in Europe for 300 years. And that implosive charge made your aura more centripetal and more navigable, something about the physics of mummification. And the Tibetan green lion, red lion, also this perfect shrinking, implosive compression. For example, why it's so famously been measured that when Tibetan saints die, it creates rainbows. We understood that physics. And this has to do with the Ark of the Covenant, imploding charge, and the plasma physics here. We're running out of time. But so if you photograph this traveling aura after death, and this is how Korotkov measured the ghost, it's called the Sela, the soul. We know when it leaves the body, why, and where it goes, why it goes, because it goes to the place of compression, the sacred space in the room, that enables you to use that longitudinal node as an organ of perception to see through it. And when you die, there's actually 4 coherent visions you see. It's called lattice cobweb tunnel spiral. And this is famous. You can read all about this at goldenmean.info/immortality, the sequence of visions seen at death. So the point is that we actually know the sounds you're going to hear. Oops, now I need to find that. Stop screen share. Okay. Okay, so I have 2 minutes left. Let's see if we can make a conclusion here. That you choose these places for birth or death or sacred dance in order to implode that charge to create this bubble of light, this ball of plasma, which we now know is a longitudinally coherent ball you take with you when you lucid dream, when you astrally project, or when you die. And lucid dreaming predicts success at the time of death. And we know that death is an electrical black hole. We actually know the infrasound sound you hear during the death experience. We know why the death visions are electrically contagious, as proven by surgeons. You see my enthusiasm. We could go on, and I'm out of time. But I think I've made a few useful clues here that you can understand what your higher self is electrically. And if you do that, you could make plans. Sunrise and sunset are better for longitudinal. Equinox and solstice are. Stone circles are. Magnetic crosses. All these are places where the centripetal force gets more focus. and therefore more vision. So, am
Dan,
I out of time?
No, you're not actually. You have another 15 minutes, so you're good to go.
Well, the other part we were going to talk about was astral travel and remote viewing.
That sounds like a great topic. I'm going to let you do that.
Okay, I thought I had 45 minutes, but I have another 15. We can have more fun here. It's okay. Now, first, let's address some basic questions here. Like when I first started teaching the physics of consciousness, so many people said to me, well, if we use physics to describe spirituality, it's going to get ugly and boring and unromantic and depressing and not beautiful and not loving. And you see, what we've learned by learning about the electrical science of what your spiritual body is, actually is how that electric field that we call the collective unconscious or the communion of saints, the Egyptians called it the Baf and the Ka, the Gurdjieff called it the Kesjan body. We now know it's a bubble of longitudinal coherent, it's called longitudinal interferometry, that propagates. And as this bubble of charge propagates coherently, it has to inhabit a fractal. It has to inhabit an array. In fact, if it's not an array, then it's not inhabitable. I was so impressed when I was a kid when we took the Maid of the Mist at Niagara Falls, and they tell the story of the ancient Seneca maiden who died in the falls, but her ghost was so efficiently able to inhabit Niagara Falls. Well, why is it that ghosts find it easy to inhabit some places and not others? Well, it has to do with the fractality of the array. Visualize a rose and you pretty much got the picture. Now, another example of story, at the end of the 2001 famous movie, when Dave said, "There's thousands of those dolmen in here, Dave." And then suddenly he could appear in anybody's TV set he wanted to. He was inhabiting an array. Now, in fact, right now you inhabit an array also. Your spark gaps, synapses in your brain are an array, and you inhabit that array. Physics is actually getting comfortable with the idea that consciousness is not the brain. Consciousness is the plasma field that forms around the brain. Once you begin to think about that coherently, suddenly we know how it was that Bill Tiller so famously measured that focused human attention causes electric fields to compress. We know exactly why, because the torus of plasma around your head has to be centripetal or you don't see. Remember, 30% of people who walk out of therified plasma report a sharpening of vision. You see, what is that sharpening of vision? Oh, I got more centripetal. I could see through the vortex at the center of that tornado. So this array becomes the physics of another language for the higher self, which is heaven, the plains of Sharon, the illusion fields, Champs-Élysées. Oh, is that a road in Paris? Oh, or maybe it's more than that. The field, illusion, you see. So what is heaven? What is the plains of Sharon? You know, there was a great chapter in Lawrence Gardner saying that the virtually infinite potential unpacking of the electron shells of monoatomic gold, Ormes, the spice, Holy Communion, that it's called a phase conjugate implosive dielectric. It's perfect capacitor. And the geometry of that electric field of monoatomic gold, like monoatomic hydrogen and monoatomic carbon, is actually stellated dodecaecosa, which is the DF subshell completion, which is what makes noble gases noble, and monoatomics, like Ormes and gold, implosive and therefore negentropic. You can build the model, the Star Mother kit, goldenmean.info/kit. It's the physics of fullerenes, for example, why they're negentropic and self-organizing. So these electric fields create, as Lawrence Gardner was saying, as the electron shells become stable in monoatomic gold, later called Holy Communion, and the spark gap of the Ark of the Covenant was an example, like Tesla's carbon arc served the same physics. The conjugate spark gap could then stabilize the gold atom in its monoatomic state, thus making it edible. Holy Communion. We have some slides about that. It's very interesting alchemy, and it involves certain shaggy algae that learn to eat gold and make gold into what's called showbread, which later became called Holy Communion. It was served in a round white wafer. The physics, which I'm suggesting as a useful example of the fractality of that field, is the reason the Hebrew language word for heaven became the plains of Sharon, as Lawrence Gardner discusses, was a name for the electric fields around monatomic gold, which are unpacking in a perfect array called fractal or self-similar. And we've proven that the dodecaecosa infinite stellation is the only possible three-dimensional fractal. You can see the animation at goldenmean.info/grail. And that array is heaven, where the breath of charge, he, takes flight, ave, heaven. And so when you die, you're going to go to heaven, right? And you do not want to be the left behind. Well, where you're going to go is you're going to inhabit that fractal space. And in that array is the possibility of efficient charge distribution. Why your house can't be made of steel or aluminum, or this isn't going to work. Because the dielectric is wrong. Charge distribution is called high dielectric constant, and that's a definition of organic materials. Stone and wood and sacred space always is made of high dielectrics, the opposite of steel and aluminum. So sacred space is where charge can implode, and that's the kind of building that makes seeds grow and children have a soul, because their auras can unpack. So this is a kind of array within which you get leverage. You get a place within which you can steer tornadoes and throw your weight around. So see, this is another example that, supposing you said, well, gee, I would like to get in touch with my higher self. And then you say, oh, why is it that on those few occasions that when I heard the voice of ancestors, and by the way, after 30 years of Kundalini, I have some untrained clairaudience. So I have on many occasions, as Valerie will tell you, I have heard voices of ancestors, and sometimes I'm pretty good at it. Most of the time I'm undisciplined. But the point was that we understand more about the physics. For example, when I was in Prague, the magnetic map of Prague is famously a rose. I had more clairaudience, actually. And when I lived in the Cherokee Sacred Burial Mound there at in Waynesville, North Carolina, our community, I heard the voices of ancestor Cherokee. I did. So the physics now makes a lot more sense to me. That is that if you want access to that distributed array of awareness, collective unconscious, communion of saints, ancestral memory, dream time, songline, dreaming track, all names for the same thing, that we can understand the physics better. Why you need magnetic line crosses, stone circles, sacred space, why sunrise and sunset are better, etc., why equinox and solstice. Because at those square node cross points, the longitudinal interferometry enables the more coherent embedding of the longitudinal EMF, and thus the voice of ancestors. And note how perfectly that is confirmed in physics by Korotkov's famous study. He told the Kogi, well, take me to the place where you make phone calls to ancestors. I see 5 minutes. and then he measured the fractality of the air of the place where phone calls to ancestors are possible. You can see all of these three different ways to measure the electric quality of sacred space and determine whether your architect deserves a paycheck, because you can measure in advance which building will cause a seed or a child to grow. And it's going to be electrically centripetal. 3 ways to measure, goldenmean.info/architecture. Point being that if that's a clue to what sacred space and fertility is that a clue then to where to go to access your higher self? Question, Cedric Uplift said, can you see the mind around the head? Well, you know, we often say if your child, oops, that's Valerie's phone ringing, but if your child says, I would like to do recreational drugs, sometimes it's not going to be enough to tell them, oh, that's bad hygiene. What we suggest instead is you use the GDV, which replicably will measure the aura, the field, the mind around the head. Gas discharge visualization, GDV, is one of the most sophisticated aura measurement technologies on the planet. Our partners are deeply involved. auraseer.com. It's Lucy, is expert and is trained with Korotkov on the GDV. And sure enough, you can measure the holes in the aura that result from doing too many recreational drugs. So it isn't, you don't need to speculate with your kids. You can actually teach them by measurement astral hygiene, holes in the aura, which also, by the way, too much alcohol or too much depression, because the coherence of your aura is the voice of your higher self. It is your soul, and that implosion has to be symmetric in order to hang together. So if you have alcoholism, addiction, or depression, or bad health, all these things result in an aura that's porous. And measuring that, the GDV, is a beautiful introduction to the science of astral hygiene, which then begins to enable you to understand the physics, which is also beautiful, which is, and here's a nice little clue for you. You know how people say, well, don't go into bars because there's lots of astral parasites there. Well, they're generally right. Or some people say churches, but let's not go there. But the point is that astral parasites or human parasites or any parasites get access to your aura, even intestinal parasites, if your aura is not imploding. So the more you're imploding with charge, which is the physics, and I do mean the physics of bliss process. Check out our Kundalini films, goldenmean.info/Kundalini. And sure enough, the ultimate secret to eliminating parasites, whether they're intestinal parasites or astral parasites or friends who are parasites who are sucking on your aura, in every case, the more you're implosive, which is to say, the more you have access to your own bliss, the more that eliminates the possibility of parasites. Why? Because at that center called the 0 point of implosion, only the shareable wave survives. And that is literally an electrical measure of pure intention. Check out how we measure pure intention, realheartcoherence.com. It turns out that when the heart is coherent, and remember the ultimate form of coherence is fractal implosion, when the heart is coherent, which sings like a laser, it means you're speaking your truth. And when you're in your truth or in your center, you're imploding. And the physics is that all waves which cannot pass through that 0 point center with the symmetry of perfect sharing will be canceled out. It's literally a test for a pure intention, which means if you're walking around with bliss in your aura, anybody around you who's feeling depressed or angry or messed up, when they come into your aura, they get more centripetal, and they either will begin to sort or they will be spit out. And you don't need to be, you can be very gentle and loving about it, but which means, this literally means that once you have access to bliss, and this is the beginning and end of all spiritual instruction, it's hygiene for sure, then you will never be pushed around. Literally. I mean, when we get to ET history, the climax of that story is, if you don't have bliss, then you're the garbage can of ET history. Whereas if you have bliss, you're the solution to extraterrestrial history, because your aura is beginning to actually produce this longitudinal coherent body called the soul. And actually, if you know why the Greys abducted and the problem of the Pleiadians, those Pleiadians, their gene pool is going to fall apart in 900 years. The Andromedans are quite clear. And you know why? They lost the skill to make bliss. They lost the skill to take memory through death, to lucid dream. So, humans might be the farmyard of this local section of the galaxy. They come here for entertainment like we go to Disney World. But they all need something. And that is, they need the humans who can lucid dream, who can make that phone call to the higher self. So that is going to be the story to our Mori, actually, which is when we're having the conversation about what is the higher self, how do you access this perfect, relaxed, zero still point in your center? And that tornado becomes centripetal, and you can make rain and do all the cool stuff. It's about understanding that this is not just in arbitrary physics. This is actually the science of how you implode enough to have an immune system, to lucid dream, to take memory through death, and to get immortal. It is about creating that bliss cocoon, your higher self. Thank you very much. I think that's
Wow, Dan, that was amazing. Thank you so much for your wisdom and such in-depth information. I mean, I could talk to you for hours and I have so many questions. I want to thank you so much for being here, and we really hope to have you back again. I know that we're having some other projects. Dan, I honor you for the hard work that you put into this important topic, and the chat is going crazy. Everybody loves you. Catherine says brilliant. Kevin says Dan Winters. Pam and Bill says great. So thank you. Really appreciate for being here.
People can all stay in touch. The main index and all of our is at fractalfield.com, so people can stay in touch. I'm grateful to serve and happy to share. Contact me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dan. Have a great day.